America is back. That's what Joe Biden said the day after the elections last November. That after years of America first, of Donald Trump not wanting to get the USA involved in foreign military adventures, and indeed Donald Trump saying we should leave places where American troops are still stationed, Biden came on this wave of America is back. We're going to fully engage with the international community. And boy, when he turned up at the G7, it was all smiles. Everybody thought he was wonderful. Business as usual. Well, as it turns out, voters, both in the United Kingdom and in the USA, have tired of endless foreign wars, and there's been quite big political pressure to bring the troops home. That was certainly the case in this country as well, despite the fact it has been many years since a British soldier was actually killed in Afghanistan. We did have a small presence, both the Americans and us, but Biden decided unilaterally to withdraw American troops, and that then gave us no choice. Biden did this without any reference to his allies whatsoever. And the point about strategic withdrawals is they need thinking through as much as advances. He didn't consult with anybody. He relied on advice from so-called experts, which said that actually the Taliban army would resist, the Afghanistan army would resist the Taliban. And even a few days ago, it was suggested by US intelligence that Kabul could hold for several months. In the end, the whole thing went in the space of hours. Was Biden given bad intelligence advice? Did he just choose to believe what he believed? But worst of all, there does not appear to have been any contingency plan in place whatsoever, if things were to go wrong, for how to evacuate up to 10,000 American citizens and certainly over 4,000 British citizens. And so now we have this extraordinary standoff at Kabul airport with British and American troops manning the border, Taliban forces not very far away, negotiations going on between the two, the evacuation of hundreds of people taking place already, but a very difficult, dangerous and tense situation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said, this is not Saigon. No, Mr. Blinken, it's not Saigon. This could be much worse than Saigon. Worse because if things do deteriorate, we could be in real trouble. I thought it was very interesting that our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, this morning tearfully said, we will not be able to get everybody home. I don't know whether the evacuation will continue. I don't know whether we're going to finish up in perhaps even a Tehran 1980 type situation with some of our people being taken hostage, and I pray that doesn't happen. But it seems to me that Biden has bungled. And I want to know from you, do you agree with me that Biden has bungled, that we've left thousands of people in a very precarious position? We've perhaps wasted 20 years of effort and much treasure and much blood. So tell me what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Has Biden blundered? I think he has. And I think the political consequences for a man whose poll ratings 200 days into being president were falling already, I think the implications of it are really quite significant.
Hi there. They say that strong walls make for good neighbours, but in polite society, making the case for border walls is to invite scorn. It puts you in bad company. Donald Trump wanted a big, beautiful wall along the border with Mexico. The communists divided Berlin with one. They started building it exactly 60 years ago today. And from Jerusalem to Belfast, they are seen as symbols of division. They certainly leave their mark. On the show last night, we played pictures of newly discovered parts of Adrian's Wall, which split Roman Britain from Caledonia, Scotland, as decisively as anything you'd see in Game of Thrones. But the truth is that walls are back if they ever really went away. In Europe, it's happening from the Aegean to the Baltics. The Greeks are spending millions on a 25-mile-long, 16-foot-high steel fence, complete with cameras, radar, drones and mini airships. They're also deploying long-range acoustic weapons, so-called sound cannons, which deter migrants with noise. Lithuania is so desperate to stop migrants coming over the Belarusian border that it's run out of barbed wire for its new 400-mile-long border fence. it's hard to borrow some. It's had to borrow some from neighbouring states. And then there's Turkey, not strictly European, but building walls with gusto nonetheless. Who are they trying to keep out? Well, here's the real shocker. Even before the Taliban started going through rural Afghanistan like a dose of salts, it was Afghans who a lot of these new border walls were being built to keep out. Shia Hazaras from Afghanistan reportedly make up about half of the migrants in eastern Greece's refugee camps. I was there on the Greek border in 2015 when hundreds of thousands of migrants heeded Angela Merkel's invitation to come to Germany for a new life. It was obvious to me then that although the mainstream media narrative was that the asylum seekers were predominantly Syrian, a very great many were not. Once the dust died down, this became clear. 2/3 of the 2015 migrants who made it to Sweden, for instance, were Hazaras from Afghanistan. It was Merkel who made that happen, and she won't do it again. Once bitten, twice shy. The German Chancellor now says her borders won't be thrown open for a new wave of migrants, this time Afghan, not Syrian. Merkel thinks a negotiated peace deal between the Afghan government and the Taliban might stop an exodus of refugees. She's already way behind the curve. In neighbouring Austria, home to a large Afghan immigrant population, the army is being sent to the eastern borders. When Viktor Orban did that in 2015 and started building a huge new border fence, he was vilified. I was at a border crossing broadcasting live between Hungary and Serbia when the migrants tried to force their way in, hurling rocks at riot police. For me, it produced an Emmy Award, but also, as the months passed, quite a lot of introspection. I can't speak for others, but looking back, I don't think I fully grasped what was happening, or if I did, I lacked the courage to tell the story faithfully. But that was then, and this is now. Here is the essential arithmetic. There are at least 100,000 Afghans in Britain, and that diaspora will act as a magnet to new migrants. In Afghanistan, where the median age is 18, there are now millions of young people who've had their horizons expanded by 20 years of relative peace, who are, quite rightly, considering their futures. They've been let down by Joe Biden, whose decision to abandon them to the Taliban is an epic misjudgment that, had Trump done it, you wouldn't have heard the last of. In time, we may come to see Biden's decision as even more short-sighted than Merkel's 6 years ago. It may not be too late. Britain is sending an emergency force to Afghanistan, but they won't stay. And even if UK forces did, as I believe they should, we are probably too few to turn the tide. So get ready for another migrant exodus and prepare yourself for the sight of more border walls in Europe where they can be built, and many more boats on the waters of the English Channel where they can't.
Yes, now, I woke up with the words of veteran Jack Cummings ringing in my ears this morning. He said, "I lost my legs for nothing. Did my mates die in vain? Yep, it was all for nothing." 457 British troops died in Afghanistan. 2,000 were injured. For what? We leave a country in a bigger mess than when we arrived, with the Taliban stronger than ever before. The old Taliban always had the threat of Western intervention looming over them. That was something that barely kept them in check. That threat has now gone. It flew away with several Afghan civilians clinging to the underneath of it. How does this government look the families of the dead and wounded British soldiers in the eye? When those families got the dreaded phone call from a withheld British Army number, the phone call that every Army wife, Army parent, Army child hopes will never come. The phone call to say, sorry, your son died a hero fighting for Queen and country. The one solace that they had was that their beloved died fighting for something, that they did their duty, that they gave their lives for a cause. That solace doesn't exist today. Our heroes died for nothing. I get the fact that we couldn't stay in Afghanistan forever. I get the fact that once America pulled out, we had to follow them. Joe Biden has a lot to answer for. The fact that he had the gall to stand up yesterday and say he stands squarely behind his decision to retreat as suddenly as he did was sickening. But the fact that he pinned the blame on the Afghan National Army was shameful. Coalition forces built a modern army in Afghanistan, and a modern army relies on logistics, air support, vast swathes of modern technology. And we removed all that from them. We cut the army off at the knees. President Trump is to blame as well. He negotiated with the Taliban and did a deal with terrorists behind the backs of the Afghan government, undermining them massively. But there's one man who's not copping it as much as he should be today, and that man is Tony Blair. Tony Blair led us into this war. He followed George Bush like a faithful lapdog. He sent British troops over there to fight and die, and I'm convinced more to massage his own ego than to shore up his connections on the world stage than to bring liberal values to the people of rural Afghanistan. who frankly weren't clamouring for enrichment to begin with, were they? I think we need to talk about Tony. Iraq, sexed-up dossiers, weapons of mass destruction, Afghanistan, backdoor deals with Northern Irish terrorists, the great big university education swindle, dragging us ever closer to the European Union. What's Blair's legacy? Tony Blair has more front than South End. How can he have the brass neck to stand before us and give his sage wisdom on anything, like some political prophet sent to us from on high? He's got the opposite of the Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to disaster. Blair has been very quiet about the tragic situation unfolding in Afghanistan. I wonder why. Do you think he feels any responsibility for the British war dead? Do you think he feels any responsibility for children growing up now without fathers, for the wives growing old without husbands, for the women of Afghanistan who are being sold into slavery, for the people falling from planes in a desperate bid to escape the Taliban? He really should do. Maybe we could airlift Tony into Kabul and see if he can try and sort the mess out for himself.
The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is expected to recall Parliament this week to debate the crisis in Afghanistan. So the Taliban must be quaking in their boots. These murderous thugs are poised to take over the whole of the country in days. Thousands of locals are racing to escape the city before it's surrendered, while staff from foreign embassies are being evacuated as we speak. The leadership of the Afghan government have already scarpered. In a stunning rout, the Taliban seized nearly all of Afghanistan in just over a week, despite the hundreds of billions spent by the US and NATO over nearly 2 decades to build up Afghan security forces. This after President Joe Biden gave this bizarre press conference just 4 weeks ago. Take a look at this.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Wow. Well, you know what to do when you're losing the argument. Keep on digging. Here we go.
The intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
What is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place.
Wowzers! OMG. Well, if that wasn't enough, he finishes with this gem.
The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Oh dear. That press conference has aged about as well as he has. Badly. And he's not that woke anymore, is he? Presiding over a humanitarian crisis and a surrender to terrorists in his first year of office, clearly in the throes of cognitive decline. This man should be watching reruns of the Golden Girls in his pyjamas, not leading the free world. And we can take no further lectures from Democrats stateside who claim to occupy the moral high ground. Well, that ended when they unoccupied Afghanistan. And far from a slow process, the Taliban takeover has been fast and furious. The country gone in 60 seconds. Meanwhile, Russia's state news agency is reporting that the Taliban have promised to guarantee the safety of the Russian embassy in Kabul. They say they have good relations with Russia. Now, there's a surprise. Friendly with the Russians. In other news, the Pope's a Catholic and bears relieve themselves in the woods. Malala Yousafzai, who was shot in the head by the Taliban for going to school and speaking up for the rights of women and girls, has expressed her profound horror at what's happening. And of course, she's right. This whole thing stinks. If we had to stay there forever just to protect human rights, safeguard women and preserve the values of freedom, peace and democracy, then stay is what we should have done. The UK, the US and other key allies are part of this cowardly surrender. We will pay the price, and the world will pay the price too.
Now, the Prime Minister will, in the coming days, be announcing what he calls a new and bespoke resettlement scheme for Afghans fleeing the country as the Taliban take hold, although he hasn't yet said how many refugees the UK would or even could take. Other countries have already begun promising refuge for the hundreds of thousands who have been forced from their homes this year as a result of fighting in the country. Canada, for instance, has promised 20,000 refugees a new home, prioritising human rights advocates, women, LGBTQ people. Many other countries have also stopped deporting people back to Afghanistan for obvious reasons. Now, I support the government's commitment to offer refuge to those most in need. Of course I do. This country has a history of doing that very well. I'm an immigrant. I came to this country as a child. My family has found this country nothing but welcoming. And that's because we are, as a country, we're one of the most welcoming countries on the face of the earth. But make no mistake, successfully integrating foreigners into any country relies on the goodwill, the compassion and the empathy of a country's people. So the government, when they get round to offering Afghans refuge, should not be surprised if they find that after having not cracked down on an unprecedented wave of illegal crossings across the Channel, the appetite for taking in many more people from abroad is not what it should be. Because quite frankly, the people smugglers, the migrants, the government and the French authorities have taken the absolute mick. They've taken the mick out of British people's goodwill. They've taken the mick out of what I believe is a genuine desire in Britain to help those most in need. Now, some might say it's not a zero-sum game. We can take in illegal migrants coming from France and Afghan refugees as well. I say no, we can't. The accommodation needed to house people doesn't grow on trees. The hundreds of millions spent looking after migrants, asylum seekers, refugees does not grow on trees. If the government wants to keep the goodwill of the British people when it comes to accommodating foreigners in this country, a goodwill I fear is hanging on by a thread for many, then they need to stop the people taking advantage of our borders.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.